Okay, today I want to make a case for you as to why the CF Stead Rambler leather specifically is kind of, to me, it's in an ecosystem of its own. And maybe if I wanted to get really controversial, which, hey, why not? Before you lose your mind, hear me out. I think this is actually a pretty good starter leather for beginners. Let me make my case. So first of all, we need to define the term leather. Many of us know that when we have all these meat eaters in the world, what are you going to do with the byproduct of the hides? Leather is this type 1 collagen material that's a byproduct usually of the meat industry, right? And there's even like ethical practices about people who go out after animals that have died naturally in the wilderness with salt trucks on the back of their trucks, whole nother story. But how do we take this hide, put it through the process of tanning, and come out with materials to make boots, belts, purses, all those sorts of things that we use in our everyday life? And I wanted to talk about the process a little bit because I think what happens is what CF Stead does. Yes, this is in the suede family. When we look at where it's cut from, I think the processing really is what sets this apart and why I think Rambler is kind of like its own animal in some regards, and no pun intended. But so suede, I mean, where do we start? It kind of gets a bad rap. I literally was just talking to someone the other day, and I was like, "Hey, you haven't worn your green suede shoes in a while. Those are slamming. Where are they?" And she said, "Well, it's winter. I don't want to wear suede in the winter. That's more of a fall thing." And that broke my heart a little bit because there is this common misconception that suede is this weak, really bad material. And I'm going to blame Seinfeld for all of the good Seinfeld brought into our lives. That episode where Jerry wears the dang suede suit or jacket and it's ruined by the weather. I think it's put people off. Now, yes, is that statement true? On some levels, yes, right? Suede is not as typically water resistant compared to, like a full grain when that's intact. But that's the problem is I think CF Stead does a few more things to the suede that I want to talk about that really change the attributes of how this leather can be used. Okay, so we kind of need to start talking about heat, and I'm going to go controversial with this because I know some people are diehard that, if you've got a hot spot, you take a blow dryer and you heat up the leather, and they're like, okay, well, it just loosens the leather. Just don't overdo it. But let's really understand how heat is used in the processing of hide to output of leather during this tanning process, because you are impacting things when you do that. And it's not as simple as just, I heated it up so it's looser, right? Like, heat makes the molecules expand, like thermal expansion, and then you can just make it break in a little bit faster. There's more to it when we look deeper into this story here. So leather, when we talk about it, I'm using it very broadly, right? We say suede, we say leather. It can be broken down into two layers, right? You have the outer grain as well as the inner corium, essentially. And the combination of those, the choices we make during the cutting and how we skive them down is really where we get these terms like rough out and suede and that sort of thing. The more outer part of the layer is where it's going to be looser. Typically, it's going to be luxurious and gorgeous where we get the suede. And as you move more closer towards the grain, you're going to get a tighter, more, the fibers are closer together. I'm going to leave it here and I'll put a science article out because I'm not a scientist. I'm just a boot enthusiast, but I'm going to try to relay my understanding of the science. It's probably going to be partly wrong to the boot world. But when we look at the suede from CF Stead, they've said in interviews they have a generous cut. It's not just the corium. They include a little bit more when we start looking at the cross section and the flesh side, particularly for the Rambler leather. They're going to include a little bit more, which is going to increase the strength of that. But when we talk about this tanning process, to boil it down out of the hundreds of steps, when you add heat to this, it's not just causing thermal expansion, okay? It is impacting the collagen fibrils within. And again, I'll link to the science article that can explain it way better than me. But when you shrink the suede, the fibrils are going to align and it's going to actually make for a stronger material. And what CF Stead does with the increase in the amount that they take from the tighter fibrous section, as well as shrinking the suede up to 30%, well, one, that's going to drastically increase the water repellency as well as the durability compared to a traditional suede. Additionally, during like kind of like I'm going to call it the fat liquoring section. It's a broad statement, I know. But they're going to add various waxes and materials to it that also change the output, the product, right? When we call this a Rambler, it's the suede-ish cut along with the process to make this output. When we look at the Rapello suede of CF Stead, they talk about how they inject Scotchgard during the tanning process. And this is why I think Rambler is actually a really good beginner's material because one, it's not as weak as I think Seinfeld portrays it. I'd love for them to redo that episode with actually that'd be a terrible idea. The Rambler jacket would be super thick. But in any case, when we look at the cross section, first of all, because very, very few times do you get a view where it includes the flesh side, right? When you finish this flesh side out, it's got this matte finish, right? So it's not just smooth, but we've got kind of like a little bit of texture here. You're going to see this veining that kind of happens here. So including the flesh, what happens is, one, we're going to shrink this down up to 30% with the process. The heating is going to align the collagen to make it strengthen it, basically, compared to traditional suede. But then also, it's the wax that we're going to put on top of this as well. And my understanding is it includes like a contrast applied by hand. So when we see some of these darker marks here, and let me switch over to this one now. This is my Coach Rambler. You're going to see, and this is the newer of the three boots, hence this has probably the most amount of contrast here, along with it being a lighter leather. But this is hand applied, according to interviews that I've read online, and I'll leave links to all this down. When they blend in the unique waxes, it gives it this marbled effect, and really, I think, kind of draws out the flesh characteristics, right? We have to remember that this animal has a story. And this comes into kind of my last part of why I think it's good for beginners, if I could just make this. One, the marbling and the uniqueness, if you can get drawn and attracted to this, and you have different levels of this, obviously this having the highest contrast, but when you look at like Stone Rambler, it has a beautiful marbling. I don't want to downplay that, but it is probably the least aggressive when it comes to looking at it. But it's good for beginners because how many times do we see on forums when they get their first crease or their first line in it? They're like, is this normal? I only wore this twice. It's fine. I'm not making fun of you, but it is like the most common question we get on these forums. They're boots, wear them, enjoy them, break them in, and just beat the crap out of them. But when you get a Rambler leather and you already have the veining, you already have the unique characteristics, adding those creases to it, you almost don't see any questions on that, and that could come from this not typically being someone's first leather. But I think you are adding to the existing characteristics. So the animal's telling the story. And then when you start putting creases and even just wearing into these, I know I kicked something, I don't know what it was, with my Coach Rambler here the other day. I just think it's gorgeous the way it changes the story of this leather. But I think that's important because, one, the different characteristics hide the creases so that they're no longer like a reaction to, I think, a newer person, but like oh, look what I did to tell the story of how this boot reflects my life, right? This reflects that apparently I like to kick. I actually do know what it's from. I think it's from when I kicked the car when I was getting in very violently. But it now tells this story throughout life that you are going to add to it, which I think is something that the sooner you can embrace that as a boot collector and not be put off by the creasing, I think the more you're going to enjoy the hobby. A good example is you guys might have seen this. I've had this now for a while. About 2-3 months ago, I think I put out a video which I included some shots of this. Well, this looks drastically different now, where you can see basically some crocking. So I decided that I'm not a denim head, but I love denim. I really wanted to just go ahead and embrace that. Yeah, I'm going to normally wash jeans a couple times or wear them with different boots until some of the denim wears off. I bought some new denim and I decided I'm going all in and I'm going to let them croc directly onto the Rambler leather just to kind of tell that story about how I love denim and what it does to the shoes. I think I look at these, it tells my story along with the animal story that it is just resulting in a better product, and I'm not worried about any damage that happens to it, which is why I think the sooner you can embrace those things, the better as a boot newbie that you will really enjoy this hobby of destroying and wearing your boots. Kind of go off on tangents here and there, but here's the result. The shrunkenness adds to the waterproofness. The wax adds to the waterproofness. The character adds to this is telling a story and I can't wait to continue that story with my own. The leather is just, it's a great insulator. You'll see that I've worn these boots through fall, through winter. I actually wasn't planning on wearing I was actually planning on wearing this kangaroo boot. Turns out kangaroo sucks as an insulator, got demoted out of winter, and that's where some of these Rambler boots came into picture anytime I had to go outside in the snow and do things. Rambler really came through, which is, again, another telltale sign of a great leather is when it can just, you don't have to change your lifestyle to it. It changes to your lifestyle. Does that make sense? Because the kangaroo was really bad in the weather, made me regret my shoe choice. I've never worn a Rambler and been like, oh, this sucks, right? Like it's just a great leather that can be very malleable through all four seasons. And I have worn a Rambler through all 4 seasons. So I think a whole nother video, it needs to be dedicated to telling your own story through your clothing items, whether that be denim, boots, whatever. But I think, I think you guys get my point here. Now, what have I drastically, I think, underrepresented? Because it may not just be important to me, but it may be important to you when I say underrepresented. Obviously, tons of character, and I said why that's a pro, why it covers up some of the initial instincts you have when you start putting creases into it. I think that also decreases the flexibility of it. You're not going to, I think, wear these to a wedding situation, but I go to weddings or funerals ideally just once or twice a year. The other 363 days, I'm going to invest in a leather that I'm going to be proud and enjoy wearing, which is why I think I underrepresented the uniqueness being a limiting factor for, hey, it's not a boot for every situation out there. The other argument of why this is probably a bad boot for beginners is this boot here is not on any website. It's only on my YouTube page. Whatever you saw on the website is not what you're getting. When they go through the clicking process of cutting the leather, if you're expecting that exact shape and the boots to match perfectly, I can see why this is not a leather that typically is recommended for beginners. But again, I think that the sooner you can get over that hump, the more you're going to enjoy this hobby. Now, with that said, if you can't, and it's got to look exactly pristine and never change, I can understand why this leather isn't for you, particularly as the wax wears away and it starts to reveal more of its suede-ish nature. Yes, there are people that try to restore it, but I think it's harder with the hand marbling that CF Stead does, which is why I think it's a unique leather. But the other reason is obviously color selection. Obviously, the stone is probably great for beginners, but the whiter you go in the variety of the squirrel, the black burgundy, it's beautiful, but it's probably not for beginners that are looking for a very flexible boot they can wear most of the time. You're going to want to stick with, I think, some simpler leathers, which I think you can get from CF Stead, but I just want you to know that you can get paralysis analysis looking at all the gorgeous options that CF Stead offers in terms of the Rambler leathers. So, what are the cons in terms of the wearability? You can make an argument that it's stiff. You can see that, this is really pliable. I've heard people say that it's stiff. I think it does break in well. I think this is a great boot for the winter, summer, spring, and fall. I don't find a time I don't feel comfortable using it. The shrunkenness that they do, the 30% reduction, the waxes that they add to it, the character, I think all make it that you, with the exception of the formality of the place that you're going to, the other 363 days of the year, there's just not a time that I feel like Rambler is a bad choice. Now, variety is the spice of life. I get it. You want to mix things up, and this is definitely a unique boot. If you don't like people commenting on your boots, that would be another negative. I get comments all the time of, yo, where did you get those? Which I like. I guess clothing is a social language, right? Not to say that you can't dress for yourself, but there is a social element to fads and such. So hopefully that makes sense for why I think Rambler is its own unique animal. It's not just a traditional suede. I think it's a step above in its toughness and its flexibility, in terms of its wearability, in terms of how it tells a unique story of the animal and you compared to just a traditional flat suede. Not to say that flat suede's bad, but that's my case. I'm sure I made tons of poor arguments. I'm sure you might disagree still, and that's okay. But this was my off-the-cuff essay here of why I think this is just a great beginner leather. Let me know in the comments down below what you agree with, and also let me know what you disagree with. I learn a lot when it comes to how I've misrepresented things and maybe even been wrong on various things too. So talk to you guys in the comments. Hope to see you guys out there. Let me know what other great makers I never mentioned, but these are Truman and Thursday boots. Parkhurst Allen makes some great ones. Let me know what other makers you like checking out that can make the CF Stead Rambler Leather a choice into a boot of your likings. So my name's been Una. Thank you for spending time with us today. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace.